Hi, I'm Lisa Senecal.
And I'm Maya May, and We're Speaking starts now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to We're Speaking.
Hello, hello.
Good to be here with you, Maya. Good to have all of you folks out there today. Maya, I wanted to continue a conversation that you and I were having a little bit earlier today.
Yes, let's do that.
Sometimes Maya has the challenge of lifting me back up when I start to dig a foxhole and curl into the fetal position, which is what she did for me today. Thank God for Maya. And I was really struggling with this idea of we've always been able to say there is more that unites us than divides us in this country. And I've always really believed that. And I definitely started looping and being like, is that still true?
And yes, it is still true. There are powerful forces that are attempting to make it seem like it's not true. And so we wanted to start off the show tonight to kind of remind everybody that, yes, we are in this together. And Lisa, you shared a story about when 9/11 happened, what your immediate reaction was, even though you were far up in Vermont, far away from it. So
yeah, in a, where everyone considers safe, and I consider safe, and certainly not a major city. But we were thinking about one of the things that really does still bind us all together is wanting to have a world and a country that is safe for our children, and not just our own children, but for everyone's children. It is not a difficult thing to do to care about other people's kids. And a shared experience that I remembered was on 9/11. I had my younger son was not even a year old, and my older son was almost 3. And my immediate reaction after the second plane hit and we knew what was happening was to race to their 2 daycares and pick them both up and bring them home. Because I needed that sense that I could protect them, though honestly, not anything I could have done, but wanting that sense of security. And in talking to other parents after that, it was such a shared experience that people with young children had from all over the place, just that instinct that we want this to be a place that is safe for our kids, a good place for kids to grow up in this country.
Yeah, and that is what is going to, I think, ultimately bring us together as we're going into the holiday season. We've seen people weaponize religion, weaponize Christmas trees, almost literally. And so I think at this point, when we're starting to talk about religion, which is what we are talking about tonight, and far-right extremism, it's really, really important to note that faith is not something that belongs to the right. Faith is something that we can all rally around to bring each other together, and remember that it is so incredibly important right now to not only protect our children, but to also protect ourselves. And so we are going to talk a lot about that tonight, because I do believe it is our moral responsibility to do so, to own that conversation.
I completely agree with you. Could not agree more. We see that faith-based organizations in this country do some of the very best work in our communities that can be done, but there is also this ugly side of it's really not religion. It's people who are using the mechanism of organized religion to be able to grab and amass power, and that's not spirituality. That's not religion. That's greed. That's being power hungry. And it's one of the big problems that we have in this country right now that we haven't talked about enough, but it is a real piece of this anti-democratic movement that we have happening.
Yeah, because this stuff didn't just happen overnight. It happened by design. So keep that in mind. And we are about to check out the last week in the Republican Party.
If Roe v. Wade is overturned, you will enforce the almost total abortion ban in Mississippi that exists in the inevitability or in the situation where Roe v. Wade is overturned, yes?
Yeah, I am hopeful, and I think there's some reason to be optimistic that the result of today's argument will be the court finally admitting that was a mistake, overruling Roe.
This is the time to overrule Roe.
So in my case, when you believe in the sanctity of life, you want abortions to be eliminated from the landscape.
The day will soon come when the radical left begins touting abortion as a tool for managing population growth.
Cat turd.
I'm proud to say there is no daylight between me and President Trump.
We are not the fringe. We are the base of the party, which is about 70% of Republican voters.
More. So many of President Biden's nominees are just barking mad. I mean, if you ask them to consider another point of view, their neck veins bulge, and they call you a Nazi.
Those of you who are really big supporters of the vaccination program, you are a new Nazi. Fauci is America's Joseph Mengele.
Joe Biden is a communist, and that's who the Democrats are. They're communists.
Look at that. Still, the communism is burning. The box of masks.
JFK is alive. You'll find out.
JFK's alive. He's alive.
So is Junior. There's more to handle.
Cat turd.
You know, when Marjorie Taylor Greene says that they are not the fringe, my first reaction was like, yeah, you're the whole damn jacket. And it's like a straight jacket, really, because the entire party, it's lunacy bouncing off the walls in a rubber room and is absolutely unacceptable. But I do think it's starting to collapse in on itself. I think what people term to be hypocrisy isn't actually hypocrisy. It's just who they are. They are power mongers, and we're seeing it happen in real time. And I'm actually glad that we are.
Yeah, I do not often agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene, to put it mildly, but I completely agree with her statement. They are the mainstream portion of the Republican Party now. It is the party of Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jim Jordan and all the rest of the wackos. And we have to loop back to the beginning of that clip, because, oh my God, the number of old white dudes talking about how it's really important to have control over women's bodies, and they're going to decide for us whether or not and when we are going to bear children is just, it is really terrifying. It's something I remember having conversations when I was young with my mom and then with my sons, saying, you know, we've got Roe, that's safe. Yes, they're going to chip away here and there, but I feel really confident that Roe is safe. And my God, here we are.
Yeah. And our guest tonight is the perfect person to talk to about this, because in reading her book, I discovered that abortion wasn't always the issue that it was. And so I hope we'll get to that tonight, but there's plenty to talk about. So I think we should bring her on. Yes, she's an investigative reporter and author who covered religious liberty, politics, policy, and education for over a decade. Her latest book, The Power Worshippers: Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism, is a rare look inside the machinery of the movement that brought Donald Trump to power. Coming to us from London, I believe, from England, please welcome Katherine Stewart.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Really wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much. It's late where you are. So thank you very much for burning the midnight oil to talk with us. So your book is fascinating and a little terrifying at times. We really want to get into the weeds a little bit more than sometimes we talk about this issue of religious nationalism, and get a better understanding of who the movement leaders are and the difference between the movement leaders and the followers.
That's right. Listen, this is a political movement that wants power. It's really exploiting religion for political purposes. And I think that when we're trying to understand the movement, we should distinguish between the leaders and the followers. The movement is organized from the top down. It's really a leadership-driven movement, and it's also organization-driven. It's not driven by the rank and file. When you're talking about the rank and file, you're talking about a pretty wide range of people with different interests and backgrounds and ideas. I think a very substantial number of them would be unhappy to learn all of the details that their leaders are proposing. So much of this group votes identity rather than policy. When they vote for the candidate who promises to say end abortion or defend what they think of as the traditional family, they're really kind of making a statement about themselves and what they value in themselves. But for the leaders of the movement, the ones sort of driving the action, their vision involves a lot more power for themselves and their networks and for the political leaders that they support. And I think a lot of them are really looking forward to a time when they can rely on government for two things: a constant flow of taxpayer money and policies that privilege their religion. And the way that the movement works is really through a kind of dense organizational infrastructure. It's a closely interconnected network of right-wing policy groups, legal advocacy organizations, legislative initiatives, very sophisticated data operations, and a very large media and messaging sphere. We could call it a kind of propaganda sphere. And all of these features are working together for common political aims.
So they're working together, and there were some very surprising names that came out in your book. Like, I was like, Bolt House Farms, I drink that juice. I was like, I will never drink that juice again. Can you name the names?
That particular organization, they've sort of reformed and are no longer associated with the foundation. So the company
my juice is safe.
Affiliated with the foundation. Okay. But I think that one thing that is really important to know when you're talking about this movement is the role of a certain number of right-wing, very, very wealthy people, I think about, that play an inordinate role in funding the movement. I think about the DeVos Prince family, the Wilkes brothers, Bradley Foundation, so many others that I identify in the book. And there's a kind of, the movement is not just pushing for certain positions in the so-called culture wars, like abortion. Those are almost like the little shiny baubles that they use to get the rank and file to vote for the politicians that are sort of favorable to the movement. The movement is also really allied with a sort of, I would say, far right, almost libertarian economic policies that are favorable to plutocratic fortunes. I think a lot of the folks funding the organizations behind the movement are as committed, if not more committed, to right-wing positions in right-wing economic policies that reduce rights for the workforce, reduce taxes for the wealthy, and reduce or eliminate regulation for business. And these policies are really having an inordinate, they're really intensifying existing economic inequalities that are making it so much harder for American families to succeed.
And listening to you kind of go through that list of policies, it sounds like you are like checking the boxes of what is the antithesis of the New Testament. It is, take the money from the poor and enrich the wealthy and do nothing for the least among us. Is there any way to effectively expose what is going on to the people who are the followers in a way that they can truly see it? Because we know, like in southern states, so many of them are There are huge numbers of people living in poverty, but they are some of the most generous in giving to religious organizations for the good that they believe that they will do. So how do we get through to people and let them see that an awful lot of people are being used who don't have the money to lose?
I think pointing out hypocrisy is really important, and I think messaging is really important. A challenge that I think we often face is that the right has invested a lot in creating a sort of far-right, almost sometimes fact-free messaging sphere, and they've taught the rank and file really to mistrust sources of information that they deride as the lying media or the fake news and things like that. And
that
they
sounds
really
like a cult.
Yeah, well, they work hard to separate people from the facts because that makes this population very easy to control.
Mm-hmm. So in a sense, they're wielding people, and it sounds like it's not about the religion.
No, it's really about power. I mean, it's really about, for instance, a lot of the issues that people are taught to vote on, like such as abortion, really didn't play such a role in a previous era. Not long ago, most Protestant Republicans actually supported some form of abortion rights, but it was really only over time that a group of leaders wanted to sort of find an issue that could unite their movement. At the time, let's not forget, the Southern Baptist Convention published statements in 1971 and 1974 affirming some form of abortion rights. But Phyllis Schlafly and a few others saw the potential for this issue to sort of unite their movement. It was really only over time that it became an identity marker, which it is now. It basically serves to distinguish the supposedly moral in-group from the supposedly, amoral out-group.
Talk to us a little bit about, speaking of amoral, Donald Trump and you mentioned the DeVos Prince family there, which Betsy DeVos was his Secretary of Education. They are deeply involved in religious nationalism. Donald Trump is the poster child of who they want to be president, but he is a truly immoral man who is unrepentant, which I had always understood as being a requirement to be considered a good Christian, being willing to admit that you are fallible and ask for forgiveness, which we know he doesn't do. So what is the appeal? How does he become so palatable when you would think he would make these people throw up?
Well, part of it was transactional. I mean, in the run-up to 2016, for instance, he promised to appoint judges who would seek to end abortion rights. He promised to funnel public money to religious schools and some of the organizations that they support. And he promised to enact the kind of far-right economic policies that folks like Betsy DeVos, people like the DeVos Prince family and many of the other movements, plutocratic funders support. And he delivered. I mean, he delivered all that. In fact, at a lot of the events that I attended, religious right gatherings and strategy meetings, marches for life and the like, he or his representatives would stand up and say, I think I gave you everything you wanted. And in fact, I think I gave you more. So it was very transactional. But I actually think that it goes further than that. I think Trump's clear disdain for the rules is actually part of his appeal to this movement. His transparently amoral character made him a kind of ideal leader of a religious nationalist, more authoritarian type. He represents the lawlessness of the authoritarian. I think he puts himself above the law and is therefore, representative in some ways of the authoritarian impulses of some number of his supporters who don't believe in equality or pluralism or, frankly, the Constitution. I mean, look what they're doing now with the big lie and trying to gerrymander and take our voting rights back to the 1960s. This is the antithesis of what makes this country great.
So I think it's really important to distinguish here, because it sounds like what you're saying is that Donald Trump is basically a tool being used by the incredibly wealthy, because the people that back him are far wealthier than he is. And they basically installed him to do their bidding, is what it feels like we're hearing.
Well, he definitely enacted policies that were favorable to the movement's funders and the movement leadership. And that was a sort of combination of, privileging a certain kind of religion in law. Of course, frankly, I think most people of faith in America reject the politics of conquest and division that this movement represents. But movement leaders really wanted to get policies that would favor a certain type of religion and allow folks of these privileged, approved religions to discriminate against others of whom they disapprove, to subordinate people that they feel should be subordinate. And certainly Trump also endorsed economic policies that were favorable to the fortunes of some of these plutocratic funders.
Right.
He's a tool.
He's a tool in so many ways. The religious nationalists have such a jump organizationally on kind of a lot of us who are just now starting to realize just how much power they do have and how very organized and effective, and taking the long view of what they want to accomplish. Is there still time to effectively push back?
Oh, absolutely. Look, the religious right has really been so determined to gerrymander us back to the 60s and roll back voting rights because they know they can't win in a fair fight. They're a minority of the population. They only punch above their political weight because of the organization. They turn out the vote in disproportionate numbers, but they're panicked about their numbers. And that's good news for those of us who sort of reject those kinds of politics and what this movement represents. We represent the majority. We just need to use the power that we really have. I think there are things we can do as individuals and things we can do when we join together with others, whether it's working on like voting rights or holding corruption to account, reaching out to friends and family. There are so many avenues for engagement, and we all have a role to play. The religious right is really using the tools of democratic political culture to end democracy, but I continue to think those same tools can be used to restore it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's about being strategic. What I've noticed is they have an organizational structure that looks like it was put together by very, very powerful and educated consultants. And we appear to be a bit scattered. And so I think we can take a page from that book and get as organized. I kind of want to check out some of these conferences and see what's going on, because I feel like, okay, we're just going to model after what they do, only we're going to do it for good, because like you said, like the demographics are changing and are not in their favor. And we were just talking about this earlier, like this is where we can come together as a country. It is not time to check out, but it's time to check in to democracy.
It's exactly true. I mean, I was at one of their conferences recently, and one of the speakers said, there's no victory without unity. And that's true. I mean, they know if you can get people to vote on 2 or 3 issues, you can control their vote. And that's what they do. That's why they're pushing, the sort of culture war issues, abortion for sure, what they call biblical marriage, and some of the nonsense that they're alleging is being taught in public schools, which isn't. But I think one thing that they do is understand strategy, and they know that, there are times when they need to, unify, and I think that's a lesson we could all sort of absorb. It's a big, noisy democracy. It's very pluralistic. We're not going to get everything we want all the time, but we can sort of figure out when it's important to come together and think not so much about, the personality of the front runner. Maybe they said something in 1986 you don't like, or maybe you don't want to have a beer with them. That's not what it's about. Are they going to appoint judges that are going to judge fairly and judge in a way that reflects the Constitution? Are they going to respect elections? Are they going to appoint people to run different divisions of government that have some expertise and really want the best for the American public? These are the really big issues we should be emphasizing in election cycles.
There are so many times that you see that the tactic of the right is to find very triggering emotional issues and use fear and anger a lot to great effect. Do you think it's possible to mobilize people to the degree that we need to, but not going to that well of, I mean, obviously we have to be realistic. It is scary what's happening, but can we mobilize around unity and hope and the promise of what this country is supposed to be?
I think it's very important to articulate a positive vision of America and to develop a positive voting culture. Look, voting really matters. The sort of veteran religious rights strategist Ralph Reed said at one of the conferences, he said, pay no attention to the numbers. Our numbers are shrinking. All that matters is who turns out on election day. Let's not forget that 40% of Americans don't vote. And perhaps they feel disenfranchised. Perhaps they might not have ever had the time to actually register and figure the whole thing out. A lot of folks are, really busy with family obligations. I mean, I think that, it's always worthwhile to try to have conversations across the aisle and find common ground. It's very worthwhile to find issues that people really care about. If you talk about healthcare and education and jobs and, well-paid jobs and things like that, affect people's day-to-day lives. But it's also really important to reach out to people who haven't felt politically engaged in the past and try to help them get more politically engaged. I think it's really important to reach out to young people, try and get young people out to vote. So I think that this is all doable, and I think that if we can also, join together and amplify our efforts, we can get a lot done.
I absolutely love this, Katherine. You're in the belly of the beast and you still believe that it is doable. And so if you believe it's doable, I believe it's doable. And I hope everybody watching also believes that it is doable. I keep saying over and over again, love feels a lot better than fear. And so we can just lean into that and remember what that feels like. And remember that we just have to get organized. We just have to get our love has to be more organized than their hate. And so we've just got to find those common ground and issues. And I think you shared a lot of them tonight. So thank you so much for being here with us. I encourage everybody to check out your book as well as your previous book too. I have to check that one out as well because they are getting in the schools and that's not so good either. So I urge everybody to check out that book as well.
Thank you so much for being with us.
It's really a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm always feeling like going into our show, like I'm like, I don't know. And then coming out of it, I'm like, yeah, we got this. Like, I really think it offers like the perspective that we need when we talk to these experts who have taken the time to do the research. We spend so much time on Twitter and it's a lot of like knee-jerk reaction this and oh my goodness, guns and Christmas trees that. And really the research shows that we are moving in the right direction. And I think we just have to sometimes take a step back, take a breather and say, hey, what's the thing that unites us? Oh yeah, our kids. We want our kids to feel safe. We want them to feel valued. We want them to feel love. They notice the hypocrisy, right? They call it out in our homes. We know that anybody who has kids knows they call it out in home. So they can see it in the country. And we don't want our own kids to be able to call bullshit on us. We don't want that. So we've got to dig a little bit deeper, y'all. And we're seeing the tools to do so.
Right. Right. I'm so glad that you mentioned young people at the end of our conversation because they were so engaged in 2020 and they came out and they made a huge difference. And I don't think we focus enough on on letting them know the power that they do have, but also educating them about the other thing that she said, which is we don't need purists. You don't need a candidate,
Right.
especially right now. We don't need to look for perfection in our candidates. We need to look at candidates who believe in and are deeply dedicated to working to preserve America as a democracy. And all of the, it's voting rights, it's activating voters, it's doing those things that are going to ensure that we win the elections, especially in 22 and 24, and make sure that we don't see the House fall into Republican hands. And good God, it is true that if the Republicans have the House, they can appoint anyone speaker who they want to. It does not have to be a member of the House.
Boo!
It can be crazy Donald Trump. It can be any malleable or demonic person they want to put in that position. So,
but we're not going to let that happen.
We're not going to let that happen because we do have the numbers. Those 40% of people who are disengaged, more of those people are pro-democracy voters. They're just not activated right now, because if they were motivated by the hate that's coming from the other side, they would already be active. We just need to find those ways and have those conversations to make sure they're showing up at the ballot box.
Yes, 100%. And don't forget, 16-year-olds can pre-register to vote in many states. So please, here's a call to action for you. Check and make sure the young people in your life are not just registered to vote, but also pre-registered to vote.
Right. Because you want your driver's license, you also need to register to vote.
Yes, because you can best believe the far right and the religious extremists are making sure that their kids are involved. They are indoctrinating their kids in what they believe. And so it's important for us to say, you know what we believe in? Democracy and fairness and inclusion. Let's do it. It feels good. We all know it does. So that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at. I'm feeling good.
And we know that this next generation, we talk about this so much on this show, they get it. They are fundamentally really good people who are so focused on justice. They understand what has been unjust. They are pushing to see those things corrected. So if we give them the opportunity to vote, if we encourage them, if we empower them and let them know how important they are, they'll
do it.
They'll save us.
I know. I was like, vote, 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 vote. And then check out the breakdown with Tara Setmayer and Rick Wilson. It's back tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. They will be joined by Michael Cohen. I'm sure you've probably seen that on our Twitter. Speaking of, follow Lisa and I on Twitter. You can see our handles right there. Maya on stage, LC Senecal, because we are tweeting up a storm these days. Make sure to tune in tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow's going to be a great show. And stay tuned for just a minute or so after this show tonight for a message from our very own Maya on the work of the Lincoln Project. Everything that we're doing to fight for democracy that you can be a part of. We need everybody in this. So we will see all of you again next week.
Apple pie, 4th of July. Authoritarian media machines run for profit by an expat bigoted billionaire. What could be more American? Fox News is at the center of the rot infecting the Republican Party and our national politics. Their circus of white supremacists and anti-vaxxers invent enemies and manipulate facts to brainwash millions of unsuspecting Americans from their TV screen every night. Rupert Murdoch and Fox News created Trumpism. It's time we make the choice to stop lining Murdoch's pockets. Call your TV service provider and tell them we're demanding the ability to drop Fox. Then go to lincolnproject.us and sign up to get involved. That way, you'll hear from us whenever there is a call to action like this one. Authoritarian mind control should be an add-on channel. Join the Lincoln Project to let Fox know enough is enough.